Okay, recording has started. Welcome to the March 1 edition of the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall. Today we're going to do sentence correction again, and we're going to focus on the use of the word "and" as a connector. Seems to be a recurring theme in a number of these problems. They like to use the word "and" in various contexts. So we'll be talking about that. All right, so what we got to start with is what we always have to start with. We need the rules, so let's just run through those. Let's try to do it sort of quickly. Submissions, please nothing too general, please nothing too specific, please no personal issues. Too general, we just can't, we just don't have, there's no way to answer those. Like if you ask us, how do I solve problems faster? That's like the whole test at once. So, any answer to that would be 100 pages long. This is the big issue that for most people submitting problems. If you have a really specific question about a really specific problem, then go to the forum, please, and post it. If you have a question about your own study plan or about your own scores or whatever, please do not do that here. Please do it on the general questions part of the forum. What we should see is something that is deep enough to be a study hall topic, but also specific enough to be a study hall topic. So intermediate depth tied into a more general question, if at all possible. So, the median in statistics is one example. This is another example. We've had a couple students submit this. This is a good submission. They gave a problem, maybe two, and they said, I want more understanding of what the word "and" signifies when it's a connector. So here we are. Again, no OG. We can't use OG problems. We really can't. So please don't bother because we will have to ignore them. Please don't submit single questions outside of a context because that's why we have a forum. So please post that in the forum. And then finally, please be polite. This is future business people here. This is the GMAT. So, one thing that's extremely important in business is to have impeccable etiquette. So, saying things like, I expect this, or, you should do this, that's not okay, guys. Really not. Especially when, we're the professional and we're giving a product away for free. At least business etiquette is the minimum. I understand that sometimes these things are lost in translation, but even if English is not your language, if you plan on doing business in a country where English is spoken, then it's still just as important for you to learn these kind of unwritten rules of etiquette. So, please submit your requests in ways that are polite. That would be great. Otherwise, the only other thing that we need to say is please check for topics. There are something like 50 of these sessions in an archive at this point. So a lot of archived sessions. That means that a lot of topics have probably already been covered. We don't really want to be redundant, so please check the archive and see whether your favorite topic has already been covered. If it has, then please watch the video where it's covered, number one. And then number two, if there's any aspect of that particular issue that we did not cover, then please tell us what those are, and then we can cover them. Greatly appreciated. Okay, that's pretty much the rules. If you acknowledge those rules, please click on the smiley face icon. The smiley face icon is over there on the left. Please click on it if you understand the rules. Okay, there's a lot of you guys not clicking the smiley face. So, signs of life. Again, the smiley face is underneath the list of names over there. If you understand these rules, please click it. Okay. Again, if you just got here, the topic of today is the use of the word and as a connector in sentences. So what we are going to do is the usual. We're going to look at some examples and so on and so forth. When we do examples, please use answer buttons. The answer buttons are about to appear. There's your answer buttons. You should see them now. So please use these answer buttons to answer multiple choice questions. Please do not answer questions in the text box. Or what else you might see, a couple of exercises we're going to do today are yes and no. So I've changed it back to that. Let me show you that really quickly if you're new to this. Most of you are probably not new to this, but just in case you are, for yes, no options, I will change the screen to look like that, where you'll have a yes or a no kind of thing. It'll be my responsibility to switch back and forth between these different schemes. So when we do yes, no, or right, wrong type questions, you'll see this instead. So that's what should be on the screen right now, because we're going to do a couple of yes, no type options first. So smiley face if you guys understand this. In other words, please don't type in the chat box. Okay. Also, please do not click your answer more than one time. This is really important. If you click a second time, then what will happen is you will erase your first click. It will go back to blank, no answer. So if you need to change your answer, you click once on the new answer, but do not click the same answer more than one time in a row. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Here's a sentence. Somebody tell me in the chat box, what's the significance of this sentence? In particular, according to this sentence, why was I late to work? In the chat box. Truck crashed in front of me on the freeway and I was late to work. Let's see what people say. Okay, yeah, so good. The answers that were coming in here are all very good. This is correct. According to this sentence, I was late for some reason other than the truck crash. Because so this is the fundamental fact that you have to know about the word and, is that and, if it's not paired with any other connecting words, connects things that are largely independent of each other. So that's the point that you should get out of this. And creates a parallel structure between elements that are, number one, presumed to be independent, unless they're a sequence. And then equal in priority or importance. And even like you're allowed to use and when events are in a sequence, but even if they're in a sequence, there's still kind of this idea that they're kind of things that are independent in sequential order. So if you have, like, here are a couple more examples of this. If you say, I like apples, grapes, and bananas. This is not a sequence. This is three separate foods that I like, presumably with the same priority. So, three separate foods I enjoy. I don't eat a lot of fruit, but it's a sample sentence. Three separate foods that I enjoy with presumably comparable levels of enjoyment. If I say something like, we ate last night, we ate dinner, saw a show, and you can put then if you want, went to a club. Then this is a sequence of events. These are 3 sequential events. Still not really dependent on the other. Still pretty much independent. With none subordinate to the other, with about equal priority. So this is the way that you use the word and. So this sounds pretty simple. And it is pretty simple. The challenge, though, is the fact that this is not the way that people talk. That's the point. So when people say this kind of thing, if someone says a truck crashed in front of me on the freeway and I was late, they're probably implying that they were late as a result of this crash. But what you need to know is that when you encounter this kind of thing in a written sentence, then that's absolutely not the case. So smiley face if you guys understand these examples, these preliminary examples. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. Okay, I only saw 4 or 5 smileys, so let's try that again. Please click on the smiley face if this makes sense. Okay, that's a better response. All right, good. If you want to actually imply that there is cause and effect, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. These are not the only 2, but these are 2 of the more common ways that you will see. So here are 2 common ways in which to indicate cause and effect. The first is to use a modifier. One kind of modifier that's sort of expressly tailored to do that kind of job is this comma ing. This is not the only thing that comma ing does, but one of the important roles of comma ing is to signify a proximate or causal relationship between the main clause and the modifier. So a truck crashed in front of me on the freeway, comma, making me late to work, signifies that the truck, by crashing in front of me, the truck made me late. So that this is actually a cause and effect type of situation. Or you can use and as long as you pair it with another connector that signifies cause and effect. So if you have and thus, or and so, or and consequently, and any of those kinds of things. So then you can do that. So and by itself presumes some sort of independence. So alone, the word and implies relative independence. However, you can pair it. You can pair and with other connectors, such as the ones above, to signify this kind of relationship. In the text box is a question about hence. Yes and no. It's correct enough for like the GMAT or for an English learner, but it's not really the kind of thing that you would actually use in this kind of situation. Like hence is more used for like logical consequences of things. So this is direct cause and effect. You don't really use hence for that. Hence is more for stuff that is like logical consequences. Like if you say, I just got a 50% pay cut, hence I will not be able to go on vacation next year. So not really like direct cause and effect. I mean, as you know, the truck crashes in front of me and so, whoa, I'm late. But it's still a result from a logical standpoint. That's how you would use hence. So in this kind of sentence, you wouldn't really, but it's also not totally wrong. So, okay. Kamna says in the first clause and signifies that. I don't think I understand the question that you're asking. I don't think I understand the question, Kamna. Like when you say and thus, it's the same kind of relationship as this, meaning it's no longer really a parallel structure in terms of priority, but the point here is more the independence of this. Like what we're contrasting here is not the priority thing. When you use this kind of modifier, you may have things that still do have the same relative priority. So it just doesn't have to be anymore. Versus if you have just X, Y, and Z, then these should be things that occupy kind of the same level in your mental hierarchy of importance. But the contrast that we're trying to make here is not so much that. The contrast that we're trying to make here is independent events versus not independent events. So that's the main point. I see that whatever you were typing is gone now, so I think we're good. Okay, any other questions, please type them in the chat box. Otherwise, we will move on. Okay, let's move on. So here are 4 sentences. What we're going to do with each one of these sentences is the following. This is not 4 multiple choices. This is 4 separate sentences. For each one of these, decide right or wrong. And then we're going to use the indicators, the check or X indicators, in a second here. So these indicators that look like that, we're going to be using those in just a moment. So take a look at these and decide whether you think that they are correct or incorrect. Please do not use the chat box to answer this. We're going to go through these one by one and gather the opinions of the class. Okay. Please don't put check marks yet because there's 4 examples, guys. So you can't answer them all at once. Okay. Let's do this one at a time. This one. If you think this one is correct, go ahead and click the green check. If you think that it's incorrect, go ahead and click the red X. And remember, this is the GMAT. I noticed a couple of you don't have votes. Deepika, Dino, Monica, you guys don't have votes. You have to answer everything on the GMAT, so you should just guess if you have to. Okay, here's what the class thought. Again, there's a lot of non-responses here. There shouldn't be non-responses. This is the GMAT. There's no such thing as a non-response in the GMAT. This one, give me a green check if you think it's okay. If you think it's not okay, give me a red X. If you are Lanesh or Monica or, yeah, Lanesh or Monica, you got to answer the question. Okay, here's what the class thought. So one of the non-responses is me, and there's a couple other people with technical difficulties. Let me go ahead and kill the non-responses from that. Just a sec here. Okay, so that's your class ratio of rights and wrongs. How about that one? Go ahead and click red X or green check. Okay, there's an LS, there's a Wendy. There's a couple people who are away. All right, here's what you guys thought. So overwhelmingly, people are saying that is fine. And then what about this last one? Go ahead and click the green check or red X, please. Okay, Wendy, Deepika, we're still waiting on you guys. Wendy. Okay, so here's what the class thought. All right, so let's talk about the first. Let's talk about the last two first, I guess, considering that we have a great deal of agreement about these. So let's take these onto the next page and let's discuss. So let's split the page in half. So overwhelmingly, the class was correct about these bottom two. So let's go ahead and start the discussion with those. In the bottom two sentences, the ideas are devouring the lunch, gulping down the drinks, and falling asleep. So 3 ideas, 3 actions in this sentence. The first is devouring the lunch. The second is gulping down the drinks. And the third is falling asleep. Somebody tell me something about these 3 actions. I know it's a very vague request, but can somebody characterize those in a way that is important? Like how are those related or not related or whatever? Yeah, they're independent and they're going to be, I mean, the first 2 may not be totally sequential because you can gulp down drinks intermittently with devouring lunch, but they're not related. Yeah, these are 3 independent actions that are separate and that are, you know, none is prioritized over any of the others. So these are 3 separate actions. And none of them is prioritized over the others. And more importantly, none is a component of any other one. So they're basically the same priority level. So nothing is subordinate to anything else here. So therefore, what we need to have here is a parallel structure. And the third sentence, which is the first in this group, has a parallel structure. And the fourth sentence, which is the second out of this group, doesn't have one. So devoured, comma, gulped, comma, and fell asleep. So this is a correct parallel structure. This isn't. I mean, this is written as a modifier, and it shouldn't be. So in other words, that much of this is written as a modifier. That doesn't make sense because it doesn't modify anything. So grammatically, that's a grammatical structure that is legitimate. But remember that grammar doesn't exist until you know what you're supposed to be saying. So you can't judge whether that grammatical structure is right until you figure this out. So those are not supposed to be a modifier. Like the orange things here are written as a modifier. That doesn't make sense. Because they don't modify. I mean, remember what modify means. Modify means that you have to actually tell me more or give me further description or additional information about something. So if I'm using those as a modifier, that would mean that gulping down the drinks and falling asleep would be additional information about how I devoured lunch, and that's false. Like, doesn't modify. So smiley face, if this makes sense. I mean, again, from a purely grammar standpoint, that sentence would be fine. But remember that there's no such thing as a purely grammar standpoint. That's the whole point here, is that there isn't a purely grammar standpoint. Okay, now let's go to the first two. As far as the first two are concerned, we were very split. We had close to a 50-50 judgment on these, but there were a number of people who thought that both of them were fine. So they're not both fine. Let's look. So there's three actions in this sentence. Let's talk about what they are. The three actions are devouring the lunch, crunching, and burping. So what is the relation among these actions? Like, what do they have to do with each other? Someone tell me something about these three actions in the chat box. Give me some information about how they are related, please. Okay, yeah, a couple people are still typing, so we'll wait a second. Yeah, crunching and burping, this is not three separate actions. Like, crunching and burping is a description of how Ron devoured the lunch. So, I mean, and you do have to use a little bit of common sense when you do this. Like, you can't make objections like, what if that was totally separate crunching? You know, like, what if Ron was walking through the snow and his feet were crunching? Well, you can't really do that. And you have to be like, what is the sentence clearly intended to mean if it were delivered to you? And these are descriptions of devouring the lunch. So it doesn't make sense to put these guys in a parallel structure because they're not supposed to be parallel. Like, these two are further description of my devouring the lunch. So they should be a modifier. They should not be a parallel structure because it's not X, Y, and Z. It's not, let me tell you three different things that I did. It's one thing that I did and let me tell you more about how I did it. So this is a parallel structure, and that's precisely what makes it inappropriate, the first example. It doesn't convey the information that it's supposed to convey. But in this case, you actually want to have a modifier. So the modifier usage here is legitimate because it's actually a modifier. Like, if you think about what this sentence is saying, this is further description. These two descriptions are more information. I mean, you know, it's kind of weird to use the word information for something so trivial, but this is more information about that. So it's additional description. So notice again, as usual, the intention is everything. I mean, there's no such thing as grammar alone. Like, you can't judge grammatical structures until you know what message they are supposed to convey or intended to convey. So a very important point. Like, grammar structures work the way they work, but at the end of the day, when you have a grammar structure, it's always going to boil down to, like, this is the kind of structure that you use if your intention is X. And so you do still have to figure out whether the intention is actually X or not. So in the first, okay, there's a question in the box. You cannot, okay, I mean, I'll address this question really quickly, not to get too far off track. Because this, I don't think this kind of thing is really tested on a GMAT, so let's try to limit ourselves to about 1 minute or less of discussing this. But what's incorrect here is the punctuation, because you can't, punctuation is incorrect because you can't have a comma on only one side of a modifier. I mean, unless it begins or ends the sentence. So, for instance, if you have, let me just make this point visually. It's probably easier to do that. If you have something like this, let's make this 4 times. Why is this taking so long? Okay. Let me space these out. So if you have something, if you have this structure with a modifier in the middle of a sentence like this, where do you put your commas is the question. Well, I mean, the point is that a modifier is either enclosed by commas or it isn't. So if you have something like this, then that's fine. And if you have something with no commas, then it's also fine. But these constructions in the last part here are not okay, unless the comma comes from somewhere else. So the real problem here is that you don't have a comma after that. If you put a comma here, it would make sense if you didn't think that the burping was connected to eating lunch. I mean, that would still be weird. Like, it still doesn't seem to be very logical because, I mean, the clear intention here, at least to me it seems pretty clear, is that those two things were going on during lunch. So if that's the intention, this is still wrong because you're putting devoured and burped in parallel and they shouldn't be. But if you thought it were logical to regard the burping as a separate and independent action, then it could work if you put a comma there. Doesn't seem okay to me from the meaning standpoint, but there it is. Okay, let's return to these. So let's not get too far off track with this kind of stuff. So, like, 'cause right now let's try to stick with the point of the study hall here. The modifier can contain two. The short answer to your question is that it could do either. It depends on context. It could be both, or it could be the nearest one. Depends entirely on the context. The short answer, Xerxes, is yes, because here we have a correct sentence that does just that. So, all right. Are we okay with these 4 examples? Smiley face if we're okay with these 4 examples. If there are questions that are directly relevant to these four examples, please type them in the box. If you have questions that are not directly relevant, please save them. Okay, someone is typing, so we will wait. If I don't understand what sentence you're talking about. If you write out the construction that you're saying would be incorrect, I could tell you. In the meantime, let's move on. I mean, actually write out the sentence that you have in mind. I don't want to be connecting dots here. So write the sentence that you think would be incorrect, and I'll tell you whether it's incorrect. But actually write it out. Okay. In the meantime, let's move on. Okay. Remember, guys, when you answer the questions, please answer them with the answer buttons. That's these. So you should see these appearing right now. Do not type answers in the chat box. Do not click twice. Let's do a problem. Yeah, Xerxes, that's definitely wrong. That's not a legitimate construction. You can't just slam two verbs together like that. Okay, that's why words like and exist. All right, try that. Remember to please use the answer buttons. I'll give you a little more time than you probably need. This is more time than you need. I'm giving you 2 minutes. You don't need 2 minutes, but you have it. So I'll be right back. We should definitely be done with this one. Okay, we don't have any non-responsives, so good. Here are your class responses. The one thing listed as a non-response is me. So let's talk about the sentence. I mean, remember that, okay, just to review, what's the very first thing you should find when you read a sentence? And I don't know if find is the right word. What's the very first thing you should get or understand? It should be the meaning of the sentence. What does this sentence mean? Like, what is the intention of the sentence? And remember that you might have to use a fair amount of common sense here. So, like, you do need to reject interpretations that don't really make much sense. So, tell me about these two things. Let's talk about mining heat from the Earth's interior and doing this. Like, someone tell me about those. Notice right now they're connected by the word and. Let's have a little conversation about that. Does that make sense? Chat box. Does it make sense to put an and there? It doesn't. Let's see if somebody can explain why not. Yeah, I'll wait for a couple more people to type. Yeah. Right. Okay, Kurt, so I like the way that Kurt worded this. So Kurt, I'll put yours on the board. And then I'll put another response on the board and we'll talk about this. Because this is fundamental that you guys understand this kind of stuff when you approach these problems. Kurt is on point here. Hold on a second. Okay. I'm having technical difficulties here. Hold on, sorry. I had to take care of some technical issues. I apologize for the delay. Okay. The intention of the sentence, when you read the sentence, you've got to look at this and you have to take into account two things. And those are, number one, plain old common sense or like real world intuition. So, and then number two, the fact that the sentence is a unit. Like, the sentence is a sentence. And it's a unit in the sense that it should convey, like, some sort of unified meaning. So, I mean, you shouldn't have a sentence that winds up being disjointed and disconnected. So when Kurt points out that mining the heat and implies that mining the heat has nothing to do with producing energy. And that's not reasonable given that this is a sentence. Like, when you read this, you have to pick up on the idea that that's the intention of the writer. It's kind of like when you read this. Like, if somebody wrote this to you, where is it? If somebody wrote to you in an email, a truck crashed in front of me on the freeway and I was late to work. Like, the meaning of the word "and" would imply that these were independent, but when you read the email, you would probably say, and by probably I mean definitely, you would read the email and you would say, clearly that's not what the person means. You know, you can't quantify why this is the case. It's not a formula. There's no kind of rule for making this decision. But what you have to be able to do is look at this and say, you know, common sense tells me that even though it's written like this, that's not what it's supposed to mean. What it's supposed to mean is this is why I was late. So, and that's a very important element of reading these sentences, is basically what one might call common sense. So for the same reason, it's exactly the same kind of thing. If you say a truck crashed and I was late to work, those are not really, the sentence wouldn't be a sentence if those were separate. So same sort of thing here. It doesn't make sense to present this in this sort of way if these were separate actions, because, you know, it would be a nonsensical sentence. You know, especially given that they go on to talk about consequences of this kind of thing. If these were separate, it just wouldn't make any sense. So when you see this, you have to grasp that. You have to grasp that there is an intended message, which may or may not be what the sentence currently says. And you have to understand that that's this isn't, at the end of the day, the second interpretation is not the common sense interpretation of those words. So, like, think about the sentence involving, think about the sentence with the freeway. I mean, you could, you know, from a cold logical standpoint, you could say that is, you know, oh, those were two bad things that happened to me on that day. But that's not what the person would mean. So, and this is not something that you can, there's no formulaic way to figure this out, but Kurt is right. You need, and a lot of other people in the chat box are also right. You need to pick up on this meaning. So, you know, there's a human reasoning element here. And it's not something that you can boil down to any sort of rules. So, you don't want and that is A and B are therefore gone. So that's it for this theme. I also want to note that you can actually solve this entire problem by the use of parallelism. So let's just quickly touch on that. You can solve this entire problem by using parallelism. Because generating electricity and heating factories are parallel ideas. Like, there are two separate and equal priority consequences, which are heating and generating electricity and heating homes. So those need to be parallel. Let's see how well these sentences do in the parallel department. So the ones that are left, generating and to heat, that's not okay. For generating and for heating, that's parallel. For generation, but then and heat. So this would be a verb and this would not be a verb. That's not okay. So for electricity to be generated and to heat, definitely inferior to D. And these are also not written the same way either. Like if this is efficient generation of electricity, then it should be heating of homes and factories. So let's type that out. Efficient generation of electricity, that would go with heating of homes. Versus if it's just heating factories and homes, then that should go with generating electricity. You just have to write these in the same way. So the only choice that actually writes these things in a way that's parallel is D. So it turns out you don't even really need the and here, but it's another consideration that is helpful. Any other questions about this problem? And I mean, do you note the importance of being able to look at this and say, what would an average person be trying to convey to me in this sentence? Because that's where you have to get the meaning from. You can't pull out any meaning that is logically sound, like from a pure math logic standpoint. Any questions? Okay, Kurt says, besides meaning, what other things should you be looking for in the first read? You really should not be looking for anything else actively. I mean, it's very, very important to read quickly and get what the meaning is, and then use splits in the choices to think about other stuff. So here's the question that Kurt asks. Okay, so when you read, you should just first read. It should have the following qualities. It should be fast, because you are not, absolutely not, picking through and trying to find errors. Very, very important. Don't do that. Because if that were a skill set that you had, then you would not need help. If you could go through and pick out errors cold, then you would not need any help in sentence correction in the first place. So you're not doing that. You should get the meaning. And if anything is blatant enough that you notice it while reading quickly, then use it to eliminate. If not, then wait until you see splits in the choices. So, I mean, J, it depends. I mean, meaning is tied in with parallelism. So, I mean, because when things are supposed to be parallel, that's part of the meaning. So that includes, like, should these be, like, including what should be parallel. Because that's part of the meaning issue. Like that you have to get as you read the sentence. So for instance, when you read this sentence about devouring lunch, when you read this, you have to pick up on the fact that this sentence down here is A, B, and C. Ron, A, devoured his lunch, B, gulped drinks down, C, fell asleep. When you read this, you have to pick up on the fact that this is not A, B, and C. So like you're not really looking for grammatical parallelism, but what you're looking for is like, oh, this is three things, and so I know from the meaning that this has to be parallel. And by the same token, this has to not be parallel. So, but basically it's a subdivision of looking for what a sentence means. All right, there's one more question being typed. Let's really try to move on here soon, but let's see what this question is. Okay, apparently people are not asking questions anymore. So let's move on. Let's go to this problem. Clear your answers. Please use the answer buttons. Give you more time than you need. Okay, let's pick something. It's been a long time, and there are still a lot of you guys with blank answers. So let's pull the trigger, please. I'm looking at you, Deepika. I'm looking at you, Xerxes. I'm looking at you, Prop. Let's pick answers, please. That means like pronto. Please pick something. Okay, last call, Deepika, Xerxes. Remember that you cannot leave questions blank on this exam, so. Okay. Deepika is terminally shy today. Let's post your statistics. Okay, here's what you guys picked. Let's look at this issue of and again. But first let's run through and get what do we mean. So what is the relationship between this blue part and this reddish part? What's the relationship? Go ahead and tell me in the text box, please. So Xerxes, that's the next step. But right now I mean like how are these ideas related to each other? Let's see if somebody can give me an explanation instead of just a diagnosis. Yeah, the red part is an explanation. It's a very good, Satish is correct. Like the red part is an explanation of the comment made in blue. The blue statement says that these are important in courtship. Well, that leaves open the question of how. How are they important? So the red part gives an answer to that. The red part is here's how they are. So this should most certainly not be and, because these are definitely not separate. I mean, in fact, one of them is an explanation of the other one. So these are about as unseparate as you are ever going to get. So and doesn't work. As Xerxes says, you need to be this should be a modifier. Or other kind of thing. You could also use a colon, for instance. They don't do that here. But a colon is a piece of punctuation that says, hey, explanation on its way. So you need to indicate this relationship with something, modifier, punctuation, something like that. And then the which here doesn't work either because that's not how which works. Which modifies the noun, which would be courtship. So that doesn't make sense. If you don't know how to use which, you can refer to our books where they talk about basic modifiers. but this which is assigned to courtship here. That's nonsense. So you have this. Another way that you can use comma ing is if you are elaborating on, or if you are giving a more detailed description of the same thing that goes on in the earlier part. So comma ing does a lot of things, but it always involves close relationships to the previous clause. So comma ing basically describe previous clause. So the red words are a more elaborate explanation of the same idea that's in the previous clause. So this kind of modifier makes sense. And it's a good thing it does, because the other two kinds of modifiers make no sense. Okay. D versus E. So there are actually three things that are not okay with D. Two of them are idioms, so I'll just throw those at you really quick, because idioms are only marginally important in the modern version of the GMAT. But like assisting X to verb is not idiomatic. And also, not only is it not idiomatic, but it's also not the right idea, because the hydrocarbons don't help them taste themselves. So, if assist them to do this was an idiom, which it's not anyway, it would mean they help the flies do this, which is also the wrong meaning. Like, you have flies that taste them, and hydrocarbons help those flies do this. So that's a double problem there. There's also those doesn't stand for anything here, and that's the problem, because it is from other species. So others already means other species. So let's write that out in distinguishing their own species from other species. So this is what the word others means already. So there's no role for those of to play. This is already others. So those of doesn't stand for anything. It's just maroon. It doesn't stand for anything at all here. Any questions about this? The main relevance to today's lesson is this idea that and is, again, incorrect, because these are not separate. These are definitely not separate ideas. So there you go. Let's look at something else. Someone's typing a question. Let's wait and see what that question is. Hopefully it won't take too long. Okay, I'll give you guys about 10 or 15 more seconds to finish typing your question here. So, okay, yeah, that's what comma INGs generally do. They modify the whole idea of the preceding clause. So this is not an exception to anything. So the short answer is yes. Let's look at this example here. This one is apparently one of the problems that's in GMAT Prep and the official guide. So go for it. Okay, we got one or two people with no answer, so please go ahead and pick one. Okay, here are your class statistics. Let's look. So this one was very nicely done. So first I want to point out that you can actually solve the whole problem with simple parallelism again. So let's just do that really quickly and then let's talk about and. So, but you can actually solve this whole thing with basic parallelism. So the second clause has either blank or blank. So if we call this x and we call this y, then x and y have to match. So, I mean, you can actually use that to solve the whole big thing. So let's take a look. In A, the part that's labeled is, it's the words that are after either and the words that are after or. Like, there's absolutely no ambiguity about this. Like, you need the words that are following those signals. So the words that precede those signals don't make any difference. So, if there's any questions about this, you should see the May 13th, 2010 study hall if you have any questions on that kind of thing. So in choice A, the words after either are from the sandstone, but the words following or are just the schist. So that's incorrect. It's not parallel. In choice B, the words following either are just the sandstone, but the words following or are from the schist. It's the same problem that A has, but it's just the other way around. C, the words following either are fashioned from, and the words following or are just the schist. So not parallel. In D, the words following either are fashioned from again, but the words following or are just from the schist. That's not parallel. But in E, the words following either are from the sandstone, and the words following or are from the schist. That's parallel. So you're done. And we're going to talk about the and issue, but all you need here is parallelism and you are good. So now let's talk about the issue of and or not and. Let's do that. So notice in 3 of these choices, you've got a modifier, comma, fashioned, and in the other 2 choices, you have and. So the question is, which one of these do I want? Should I have a modifier, or should I have and? Well, here are the 2 ideas. So the 2 ideas are this idea of like how old they are and what they're made of. So number 1, the images are like X number of years old, like from the time of Y empire. The other idea is the images are made from one of 2 types of rock. tell me about those ideas in the text box, chat box. Tell me a story about those two ideas. Relation, no relation, independent, just one of them describe the other one. Tell me a story. People are shy today. Tell me about these two blue ideas. Yeah, the two blue ideas are absolutely independent of each other. So the modifier is inappropriate. So A, B, and C are all incorrect for that reason as well. Because there's no modifying going on here. So eliminate A, B, and C. Should be parallel. In other words, this means that you have to pick a choice that creates a parallel structure for these things, even though the original sentence doesn't have one. Because again, that's the meaning. So the meaning is, let me tell you two totally separate things about these images. Number one, they are this old. Number two, they are made of this stuff. This is number one and number two. That have like nothing to do with each other. So even though the original does not have a parallel structure, you have to make one. And it's important to realize it's kind of like the sentences with devouring my lunch. You have to realize when you read the sentence, like what is the intention? When are these ideas like A and B and C type of thing, and when are they dependent on each other? Because you have to make those decisions before you start judging grammar. So again, it's kind of like this right here, where before you judge these things, you have to come up with this decision that these are three things that are separate, but these are not. So that's why it's imperative to understand the meaning first, because otherwise you have no idea which structures are correct and which structures are incorrect. Xerxes, I forget what an appositive is. In general, I'm not really good with grammar terms. I actually don't remember what that means. But I don't think anything. These things are participles. So there's nothing here that I don't remember what an appositive is, but these are not appositives, whatever it is, because these are participles. Oh, if you learned it from my site, what I do if I need to explain something is I Google it and I write about it, and then I kind of forget it again. Like I don't remember names at all. So because you don't need to know names to judge these things. So if I ever use a name like that, I can guarantee you that I just looked it up like 5 seconds before that. But these are not that. Like these are actually what are called past participles. So I think you're barking up a different tree there. Let's try to get to at least one more example and then see how we're looking at time here. Let's try this one. Didn't load? Okay, question is there. Okay, same technical difficulties again. Let me know if you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I got logged out for a moment there. I apologize for that. Okay. So let's put your statistics on the board here. Here are your results. So we have a lot of B here, and that's a good thing. Let's look at the AND. Again, we have an AND here, and we have a modifier. An array of modifiers here. But let's look at these two ideas again. So what are the two ideas that are connected? Well, it's two things that the programs let families do. So it lets them, number one thing that it lets them do is be able to move into new housing. Or just move into new housing. So I mean, it's depending on which choice you pick. And then the other idea is to apply part of the rent to a later purchase. So these are not, these are separate. I mean, you can't reasonably claim that one of these is dependent on the other one. Because one of them is they can move in right away. And the other one is, after they've been there for a while and paying rent. I mean, these are not even related ideas, because one of them is about moving in, and one of them is about what they do with rent money. So these are separate. So if we realize that, then we know that we're looking at another situation that requires AND. So we want the AND that leaves us with only A and B. So we want AND. Only A and B remain. If there are any questions about that, feel free to put them in the text box. Between A and B, I'll make a long story short. Maybe we can smash out another problem here. This says enable, and this says to be able. So that is one of the most redundant things I've seen in a long time. You can't enable someone to be able to do something. I mean, you can allow, you can make them able to, or you can enable them, but not both. So A is redundant. Any questions about that stuff? If not, we can probably smack out one more problem here in the time that we have. Any questions? Anybody has questions? Okay. Let's go ahead and try to bang out one more problem here then. Let me find one for you guys. How about okay. How about this? This one's cool. This one requires some careful attention to certain aspects of its meaning. I don't want to give too much away at the moment, but you need to think about this one think about the meaning of this one kind of carefully. So I'll give you a little bit of time. Go for it. A couple of you are without answers, so please pick something. Thank you. Okay, let's discuss. I'll go ahead and put your statistics up there on the board, and then we will have a little chat here. Here are your statistics. There you go. So there's more different opinions, I guess I would say, on this one, but let's talk. We have an and then we have a not and. So let's concentrate on that. These are modifiers, and these are not modifiers. So let's talk about this. The meaning of the sentence here, we have two things that we're connecting. We're connecting, number one, it will publish the books. And then number two, sell the books. So will it publish in order to sell? In other words, these are not independent. So you would want to use a modifier. Or are they going to publish and also sell? In other words, viewed as independent. So you would just not use a modifier and you would use a parallel structure. In this case, for once, this is honestly a good question. It is like, which one of these should we use? This is not obvious this time. So, does anybody have any insight into this? Because if there were no other context clues, then you could actually make a legitimate case for either of those. Like if there were no context clues, you could definitely say that they were publishing the books in order to sell them. But you could definitely also say that they were just, that the company was going to publish the books and also sell the books. So we do have to make this decision. I mean, we have a parallelism also, so maybe we don't have to make this decision, but we very possibly do have to make it. So let's see if someone can figure out a criterion by which we can make this decision. Chat box. Any ideas? Here's a hint. Look at the other context in the sentence. Like, it matters what the rest of the words are. Jay, tell me about that. Like, what in the rest of the sentence makes that true? I mean, you're correct, but we need something more. Because this is not so much common sense. Like, this could be either. Because if I say that a company publishes books and also sells them, then that is totally legit. But if I say a book publishes books in order to sell them, then that's also legit. It just depends on what the company means. So, copies that can be printed upon purchase, not really, because that's what the consumer does. So that's not really relevant. Let me tell you, we kind of got to close up shop here pretty soon, so let me clue you guys into this a little bit here. What you want to be looking at here is this. You're talking about a digital imprint division of a company under which these things happen. So it's a digital imprint division. What that means is it's the company, it's the part of a company, it's the division of a company that makes digital materials. So for that reason, it doesn't make sense to have selling the books as a separate parallel act, because a digital imprint division wouldn't do that. Like, that's not what that kind of division of a company would do. So instead, a quote, digital imprint division, unquote, would only do one of these things. So, took me a little bit of trouble typing here, so bear with me. A digital imprint division would not do both. So, that's what lets us make the decision. The decision is that this company publishes them, and then they are things to be sold later by some other division of the company, most likely. So that means we don't want the ones that say and. The ones that say and are not legit. Any questions about that? If you have them, go ahead and type them in the text box. Prab says this. Prab says, I am confused between these. would probably be confused because those are not actual structures. Can anybody answer Prab here? Can anybody explain to Prab here what are the actual structures that you're actually looking at? Like either as and as either are not actual structures. What are the actual structures? Anybody explain to Mr. Prab? Yeah, it's just either X or Y again. It's kind of like our problem here about the images in India. So it's the same sort of thing. It's just either X or Y. And X and Y have to match. So this is the same idea. So let's put that on the board here. Right there. There's no such thing as either as. Like you're dividing these things up in ways that it just doesn't make sense to do. So this is why, I mean, people, this is what happens. I mean, my kind of amateur diagnosis of this situation here is that you're trying to learn way too many little things. Because this is one of the most fundamental things that you can learn. It's parallelism. So if you're thinking that either as and as either are actually structures that exist, that indicates that the way you're learning about this stuff doesn't make sense. Like it's indicating that you are actually thinking that sentence correction is like 95,000 little structures. And it's not. It's a relatively small number of large themes. And one of those really large themes is parallelism. So you have to be able to recognize these kinds of basic structures where they occur. If you don't, then, like if you're asking questions like this, what that means is that the focus of your studying is not right. Like it means that you, instead of trying to learn themes, it means you think you have to learn like 100,000 small things. And if that's your approach, then you're going to find sentence correction very, very hard. I mean, it's just either X or Y again. And you're just playing a matching game. So let's see what happens with the matching game here. Well, in A, this is just electronic books. And that's downloadable copies, so A is parallel. In B, this is as electronic books, and this is just downloadable copies, so B is not parallel. We've already eliminated the other choices, but let's see how they do. Either is followed by electronic books, or is followed by as downloadable copies. That's incorrect. It's not parallel. In D, either is just followed by electronic books, or is followed by as downloadable copies. That's also not parallel. And in E, either is followed by books, or is followed by downloadable copies, so we're fine. So only A and E are parallel in this case. And E we've eliminated already because it uses and where it's not supposed to. So only A and E are parallel. So that's a I just misspelled parallel. Way to go, dyslexia. This is a very, very big deal if you are not seeing basic parallelism and you are seeing it as this kind of thing instead. Like that means that you actually have to change up the entire way that you think about studying sentence correction. Because sentence correction is not 90,000 small things. It's a few major themes. Can you have either as X or as Y? Yeah, you can, definitely. I mean, as long as they match, then, and as long as it fits into the rest of the sentence, then yes. Yes, you can. Okay. It's basically quitting time, but if anybody has any quick questions, it's a lot of words starting with Q at once. Quitting, quick questions. It's basically quitting time, but if you have any quick questions, feel free to ask about this problem. Otherwise, we are going to wrap this session up.
let's see, one or two people typing. So let's see what that is. If you don't have questions, thank you very much for attending, and I hope to see you again in the following edition. But I mind recapping again why we ruled out and. Yeah, it's a theme we've been talking about in this lesson. I mean, and would imply separate tasks. So, like, and would imply the second of these. And would imply that these are separate, independent tasks. Publish to sell, or publish to be sold, means that this is the intention of publishing them and that they're not independent. So the way to make that decision is to realize the sentence is about a printing division of a company. It's not about a printing division and a sales division. It's just about a printing division. So this interpretation doesn't make sense. Alright, gotcha. So I think we're on the same page. Anything else that is super fast, please ask. The finishing touches on the session. I think I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording. Thank you guys for attending. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time on March 15th. And this recording will be posted in a few days. Alright guys, that's it. I'm going to turn off the recording.